Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me? Is this on? Okay, good. I'd like to call the meeting to order, the Planning Commission workshop of June 16th, 2022. I'd like to remind everyone to please silence all electronic devices, and for those who are attending virtually, please mute your microphones while not speaking. This time, I'd like to ask you all to please rise for a moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Jamie Girardi.
Here.
Don Anderson. Peter Hansel.
Here.
Christopher Poole. Chris Williams. And Chairman Charles Gray.
Here.
Regarding Chris Williams, he stepped out for a moment to take a call, and he is here.
All right, yes, that's right. Chris Poole he said he might be virtually here, but I wasn't sure. Patty, do you know whether he is or not?
I don't believe he is. No, he's not on.
Okay, I know he had the sickness in his
Do we have
family.
any virtual attendees at all?
No.
Okay.
What, Denise?
Denise?
Denise, okay.
Denise, okay. All right, so we have one topic for discussion today. We'll be discussing the Pasco County Comprehensive Plan update for 2050. During the workshop, staff and project consultants will update the Planning Commission on the project progress of the project and seek guidance on topics that should be considered or prioritized with the update. All right. So with that, I think we can begin.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Valerie
you.
Brookins with Long Range Planning and Project Manager on the update. I just want to thank you for joining and being willing to do this workshop with us. We're going to go through the introduction part real quick because we know you have seen it, but just for recording purposes and anyone that may be joining at home. And then we're going to jump into some of the topics that we have heard from our engagement efforts. And we will make it, we'll go through each slide, but we will stop on each slide. So we'll run through what we heard. It's kind of been organized in themes, some of the things that rose to the top. So we will stop on each slide, and then we can discuss and speak freely about the topics, and then move on to the next, and then leave a little time at the end, too, for open. So just wanted to reintroduce our consultant team. A couple of them are here. Steve Shoecraft with HDR, and then also Tammy Verana with Verana Consulting. So I am going to turn it over to Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Steve Shoecraft with HDR. We'll go through, we've got a slide set that has some introductory material, so we'll go through that first, and then we'll what we'd like to do ideally is review some of the feedback that we've received and sort of mined in looking at past documentation of engagement activities and survey results and other things, and then get your feedback on that. So start to build a bridge between what we've learned through some of this research and how you see that influencing the comp plan, future of development in the county, and sort of your role in guiding that work over time. Do I have control here?
Do we have? Yeah, hang on one second.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, next slide. I think the first slide up is just a quick agenda. So two quick parts. One is an intro to the Pasco 2050. The new slide in here is a little report on where things stand in terms of the work we've done so far. So I'll pause on that and talk a little bit about progress. And then we'll go into the issues and ideas for the plan process. Next slide. Next one. So as you all know, Pasco 2050 is what we're calling the comprehensive plan update process. The comp plan is a requirement of under Florida statute for local governments around the state to develop long-range plans, and then that provides the basis of authority and guides decision-making for zoning actions and capital improvement budgeting. Next slide. The comp plan is very broad in the way that it's defined. So it provides the high-level policy guidance and long-term guidance about how the county manages growth, balances needs from different constituencies, serves changing demand. And so we know, the demand for housing, for commercial space, for industrial space and employment space is I was going to say increasing. It's not really increasing. It's been high for a long time, and you've experienced that sort of change that results from serving that demand. Addressing congestion, I'm sorry, back one or two. Expanding opportunities, improving planning tools. So now we'll go to the next one. As we've talked about before, we're talking about continuing significant increase in population in the county. So current projections call for 223,000 people by 2045. I think in previous presentations, we've said 250 by 2050. But you can see that curve has been relatively consistent since the 1970s and previously. We just didn't add those earlier years on this chart. And that pace of growth that you've experienced is projected to continue up into 2045 and 2050. So that's a significant number. As we've talked to folks in listening sessions, we've asked them to think about, many people have moved to the county during the time frame represented on the slide, and we've asked them to think about when they came here and the change they've already experienced, and imagining that pace of change continuing. Next slide. So we're in the early years of a multi-year process to help the county update the comprehensive plan. So these early years are focused on research and listening and understanding issues and opportunities. And then during next year's work, next fiscal year's work, we'll start to move into the plan development process. So that's when the pieces of the plan will start to come together, and it'll start to look more like a full update. Thank you. So I wanted to pause on this slide. This is where things stand with the work so far. So this is our early research and early engagement activities. The plan diagnostic reports are published on the Pasco 2050 website. So that's been made available to the public. That looks at the Pasco's place in the region and how you're connected to surrounding communities, looks at demographics and socioeconomics, land use, development, conditions, mobility, and a review of your existing planning and policy framework that guides development. We also did a market analysis to look at where the market opportunities are, where your sort of the strength and weakness in your market position. And then we looked at some planning best practices to look at how other communities have organized their plan to help guide development in an efficient way. We've done two things to try to understand what people's issues and concerns are about the future. We've done a series of listening sessions with groups from across the county. So we try to get kind of regional diversity and interest diversity in those sessions. We didn't engage thousands of people, but we had these more focused discussions with groups from Northeast Pasco to folks representing the West Market area, some of the county's specific interest groups. You want to help me with the names?
Yeah, we had the Bike and Pedestrian
Advisory
Committee. We went to the Land O'Lakes Rotary. We went to the Commission on the Status of Women. And I know I'm missing a couple of them. Kona.
That was West.
Well, that was West Market.
And the Food Policy
area.
Advisory.
Thank you. Food Policy Advisory Committee.
So the goal was to get out to some select groups and start to get some feedback.
So what
it's not-
about
I'm sorry.
the Pasco Economic Development Council? Have you met with them?
We did a presentation with them and shared information, but not a listening session.
And we've been working with staff and collecting their, data about what's in the pipeline for them and what the plans are.
Okay, I just think it would be a mistake to not get feedback from the economic development folks.
And we will definitely include them. We're going to be ramping up efforts for next year too, but they'll definitely be included in future outreach too.
Okay.
And then the other part of that was we have the website up and running now, and we've got a survey instrument on the website, 2 different ways people can engage. They can post sort of comments and pictures about their perceptions of the county, and then a more open-ended questions in a survey asking about what they value in the county, what they're concerned about, what they'd like to see in the future. So that'll be an ongoing web-based tool where we'll get feedback as we move through the process.
And that's on the Pasco County website?
It's on the, Pasco 2050 site.
It's a specific project website. So, like, for example, when we went to the Economic Development Council to speak with them, we shared the website with them, and on that survey tool, there's also the same questions we asked during the listening session. So we encouraged everyone to go there and put their feedback, which we have gathered all of that too. So hopefully we've captured some of their input at this point, but we'll continue.
Okay.
And then for the issues and ideas research, there has been a lot of engagement around planning, economic development, redevelopment issues in the county over the past 10 years. So we pulled documentation of that effort and reviewed that to try to understand what people have been talking about in different forums. And Tammy took the lead on that exercise, and we can talk a little bit more detail if you're interested about the material that we looked at and some of our findings. But the next set of slides tries to distill those and organize what we learned into a set of theme statements, sub-statements, and that's what we'd like to get your feedback on. So that report, the Issues and Ideas report, will be published in the next couple weeks. We'll get that out. I think that county commissioners asked to have a look at it before it gets posted on the website, and then we'll announce that it's available for review. But that'll have kind of our reporting about what we learned through that exercise, and then a significant number of attachments that's the actual documentation of those early feedback on planning issues.
So will this committee receive the advanced copy of those too?
I think at your request, I don't think there's
Yes,
any issue with
we
that.
definitely do that.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. So issues and ideas for the plan. This is our attempt to understand what broad concerns and ideas are for the future. Now, we're trying to report this relatively directly, so we're not putting a spin on it. We're not trying to message it in a certain way or head in a particular direction in it. We're just trying to report out what we've learned through the listening sessions, survey feedback, and what's in our review of the previous reports and documents. So when we pull this up, this is our attempt to distill what we heard, not our attempt to interpret it or spin it in any particular way. So based on the review of the material that we collected, feedback that we collected in the live meetings, the feedback that we abstracted from all the documents that we reviewed, we organized things around 5 primary themes. And again, this is what as we talk about it, this is what people talked about or shared in different kinds of public engagement activities or through survey instruments. They talked about the county's character and identity, and sort of countywide and then community by community. So, what we know in Pasco obviously is that people identify as Pasco County residents, but they primarily identify as residents of a community within Pasco. And so that's a very diverse set of perspectives and a diverse set of ideas about what their life is like in their community and how they see the county overall. Connectivity and accessibility is primarily about transportation, about how people get around. What alternatives exist, what they're concerned about, issues with capacity, safety, drive time within the county and between the county and other places, Competitiveness and fiscal responsibility focuses more on, or we pulled information that was focused more on jobs, on employment opportunities, on the challenges with commutes elsewhere to get the jobs and opportunities, and then how the county spends its tax money. Whether that there people raised concerns about fiscal responsibility, about efficiency, about focus of that funding on different kinds of projects to improve quality of life and improve competitiveness. Livability and Opportunity was more about how what people valued about Pasco as a place to live, place to raise their kids, place to retire, place to visit. So those were generally more focused on quality of life at the community level, how people do their day-to-day business, how they experience places in their community and across the county. And then stewardship is we organized or rolled up comments about natural resource conservation, a little bit of discussion about sort of character and neighborliness and how things are starting to change. A lot of talk about we don't want to become Tampa, or we don't want to become Miami, or we don't want to become someplace else. A lot of that sort of conversation that fell into different categories. So this is the next set of slides goes through these one by one, and we're going to highlight some of the comments that we heard from folks, and then the real test here is to see if this material rings true to you. So what we'd like you to do is think about this. Does it ring true? Does this sound like the voice of Pasco County residents or business people or property owners? And what voices might be missing from this quick summary? So that's one of the key things, is that we want to make sure that we're not, looking at it through our lens, we're not missing something that you think is out there. Either we didn't talk to the right people, or those voices just didn't come across to us. So that's one of the important factors. So this slide is about, the green are things that came up fairly often and were pretty direct messages to us. Concerned about the impacts of rapid growth on community character and compatibility. People talked a lot about their concern when they see a site cleared for development, when they see corridors getting more development and more dense over time. There was not, an observation that we would make is that there's not a real clear sense among the general public about what the comprehensive plan calls for. So they'll see development on the side of the road that's perfectly in line with what the comp plan calls for and what zoning allows. They're just upset about it because it represents a change in their, in their day-to-day life. There was a lot of talk about the diverse character of communities across the county. So, we heard from folks in the newer large-scale master plan communities that thought they had, the best quality of life of anyone in the country. We heard some people in older communities that felt like they were kind of falling behind, that they didn't have the advantages of other folks in the county. They didn't have the same quality of facilities, same accessibility. So there was a big divergence in perspectives. And we tried to understand. If someone made a comment, we tried a follow-up question. Well, where do you live, and tell us about your neighborhood so we can understand where you're coming from. A lot of talk about protecting and conserving rural communities and landscapes, and this is another point where people said, I'm worried about rural development's effect on rural character, is essentially what we heard, and we heard that often, and we heard that across the county. But we tried to understand what that meant for people. Or do you mean you don't like the way new development looks, or you don't like the fact that there's open fields that are being developed now? Are you concerned about the agricultural economy? Are you concerned about how things look as you drive along a rural roadway? There's a lot of complex and overlapping issues and concerns when people say rural conservation. When we ask the question, we get a lot of different feedback.
Steve,
Yeah.
can I ask quickly, what is some of the feedback regarding rural communities, farmland, that type of situation? What if you could summarize in 10 words or less, what would be the feedback? Is there a concern, in my opinion, would be that you're taking this land that used to be for agricultural purposes, and then the next step would be where we can get the products or agricultural products that we are currently developing.
I think that's a dimension of it. Yeah, people talked about local agricultural production, the agricultural economy, and then food source and food security was part of that discussion.
Okay.
But it wasn't, there was a lot of other factors in there. I think a lot of people, it was really visual impact on a landscape that they value. You know, I like my open views, I like the rolling hills in Northeast Pasco, and I don't want to see those develop.
So, and to clarify, were most of these comments coming from Northeast Pasco, or were they coming throughout the whole county?
I mean, in Northeast Pasco, it was the primary focus of discussion.
Because there's parts of the county that are already not agriculture, so I can't imagine those people are saying, like in West Pasco, I doubt they're saying, I want to preserve agriculture, because there effectively is not.
We did hear that we heard it across the county. But Northeast Pasco was almost 90% of the comments were focused on that. In other plates, it could have been 20%.
I think we heard it from every group we talked to, which surprised me, but it was more just having that rural option. It wasn't necessarily focused on agriculture, but liking that there was space that was open, so we didn't just become one big suburb.
If I can chime in here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and so, as somebody who lives in the Dade City area and lives on a rolling hill, has an open view, and I mean, certainly those ring true to me, and I like the fact that what you said, because there's overlapping things, and I know there's some people who, yeah, agriculture's going away, and that's sad, and I'm sad about that, but I also, you know, there's also, most of the people I talk to realize that it may not be sustainable for those people to do that. And so we get the fact that development's coming, but I think a lot of the folks, at least in my area around Dade City, aren't necessarily opposed to some growth coming, but what they don't want is the 40-foot lots right next, because I live on agricultural land right now. You know, I know across the street there's going to be lots coming there, like 40-foot lots. And to me, that just kind of destroys that whole look of that area. And so I think that's, again, I'm sure there's some people who wouldn't want to see that developed at all. Sure, I get that. And I'm not one of those, but at the same token, I think we need to be smart about how that develops, and it doesn't have to look urbanized where you have these beautiful view sheds and things like that. So how can we do a good job of planning that?
Could I just ask a follow-up question? Because when you asked for the feedback, did you show everybody the chart that says we're going to get, you know, 300,000 or 400,000 more people by 2050?
Yeah, that's how we started it.
So,
the same set of slides on the front end of
So
this.
the people that are saying we need to protect our rural community, where are they suggesting that growth go? Because you can't say we want no growth, because otherwise where are we going to put those 400,000 people? So the people that are saying we want to preserve the rural areas, where are they suggesting we have the growth?
We probed that question a little bit, but I think it's just generally not near me. So it's just someone else can deal with that. I don't want to deal with it. And that's classic
Sure.
planning, like public engagement dialogue that we hear is we try to push that question, but it's like, well, down south where there's already development, don't let that happen up here.
Add a little bit.
Yeah.
Am I on the mic or how does this work?
Are we on, Patty?
I can just speak loud. So we did hear some instances where people said this is where it should be directed. It should be going into redevelopment areas where there's blight, so that there could be replacement in those areas to the benefit of the ones that want to stay more rural, more like rural villages. And we did hear too about the lot sizes. They were perfectly fine with 1 acre lots or something of not necessarily even what you think of as agricultural size lots, but something that was more akin to where they were living.
Yeah.
So like for like, as opposed to.
Right.
Yeah, we asked about conservation subdivisions, so where you cluster some houses and you try to save some pasture land or woodlot or other resources, and they said, no way, everything should be carved up in an acre. They don't want to see any smaller lots anywhere. So I think for us that, that points to one of our primary challenges in developing the plan is how do we figure out what the right policy is. I think one of the key things is people don't know where that line is drawn now between the more suburban future land use categories and the rural categories. And then even when they see some development in the rural categories, if it's clustered, it looks like more urban development, but it's actually a clustered subdivision. So it just means they're squeezing smaller lots on a site to allow for, wetland preservation or other conservation areas.
I think the thing you touched on redevelopment is, there's plenty of areas that could be redeveloped in our county, but from a practical point of view, that's how do you do it? Because take an area like Moon Lake Estates. It's a beautiful piece of property. It's all cut up into, 30, 40-foot lots, 30 by 110, 40 by 110. And you got scattered owners and mobile homes all over it in various states of unrepair. And but how do you go in there and, it's be almost impossible for one person to go in and buy up all, it's just
If they're individual
not
condo
workable.
lots, yeah.
It would almost have to be some kind of a public effort to gather those properties and, and acquire them so that they could be redeveloped. Because I think there is an opportunity to do that, but I don't see how you can do it as a private company. So, if we want to redevelop some of the areas where we made mistakes, that would be a good approach, but we got to figure out a way to do it. And I think it's definitely needed. We have Moon Lake Estates on one side of the road, and we have, a beautiful development on the other side of the road. So it's just not compatible. And to a certain extent, that's one of the things I'm thinking about. And the other thing that I personally don't like to see is really turns me off when I drive by a nice wooded piece of property, and then next day I come by and it's leveled. There's not a tree on the site. That to me that makes no sense. It might make sense, efficiency-wise and engineering-wise, but a place like a development like Beacon Woods, where they have roads that curve through the tree lines and so forth. To me, we ought to encourage that kind of development more than just go in and wipe out all the trees. I've seen them, tear out, 500-year-old oak trees to put a car wash. That doesn't make sense to me, So those are the kind of things that I think when you drive through a county and, the beautification, what you feel, the ambiance, the nature of the whole, that's why they're trying to redo the corridor on Highway 19, and some of it looks great. But quite frankly, the part that's in the county looks terrible. They planted all the trees and they're not doing anything with them. They're getting all overgrown. Nobody's maintaining them. They're just weeds now. They probably spent thousands and thousands of dollars to do that. You can drive through Newport Richey and they're manicured. They take care of them. We need maintenance, and we also need code enforcement. I know when I drive through an area like Regency Park, every third home is a nice home, but the other ones, they're rented out. People park all over the yard. When you have a nice development, I'm happy where I live because we do have an HOA that enforces the rules, and you're not allowed to park all over the yard. You got to follow certain guidelines. You got to keep your property looking nice. If you let it go, then that's going to be a big mistake, and that's a mistake we've been making in the past. So, I think that's a lot of it, and I think there is a lot of property that can be I've seen property redeveloped like down in St. Petersburg, places like that, but it's a one house at a time thing. It's going to take forever to do that. So
I think that's the comment you just made about the HOAs are kind of designed to take care of their own turf. So there's this sort of internal control if you're in a master plan community. But when you're in an older community without that, the the possibility is the county could step up services
Right.
to provide not HOA level services, but an enhanced level of service in some of those older communities to help for stabilization, for beautification. And then eventually, maybe the county would move into play more of a redevelopment role, so that, there could be county level redevelopment areas where they focus attention on places that are really struggling. But those would be they'd be new roles for the county to play. So
Right.
really, this process is kind of asking the question, is that an appropriate direction to take? When you mentioned, one of the challenges the county has is a lot of the development is concentrated on the major arterials. So when people drive through the county and experience the county, that's what they see. And all the density is pushed to the frontage of those master plan communities because it's the logical place to put it. So you have apartments and townhouses, and then you've got single families. And then in the back of those, you've got major conservation areas. But you don't see those when you move through the county on a daily basis. So a lot of those really valuable actions to protect major resources are not really experienced by people. So part of it, I think, is figuring out how to manage the place quality along these corridors. So a lot of those are DOT corridors, so the county doesn't control that right away. So you have to work with DOT. You'd have to commit to some sort of an enhanced landscape program because DOT is not going to do that as part of their standard work program. The cities tend to be better at that because they're more focused on their turf. So that would be a new role for the county, would be to move into more of a active beautification and corridor improvement program.
Right.
Yeah, I was just in, I think it was Lake County, driving through somewhere, and I mean, those corridors, you see development, but all you see is like the sign, and you see a bunch of landscaping. You're not seeing like, oh, there's 500 houses back there. You don't even see those because, it's all beautifully landscaped in front, and then you drive back and then you see that. So, I mean, I'm not saying all of it should be like that, but it'd be nice to have more of that where you're not just blasted with 40-foot lots of houses sitting right there, right on the street there that everybody can see. It'd be nice to have it was just a much more pleasant look. And again, I'm not sure if that's comp plan or LDC or whatever, but
I think some of it comes down to the comp plan, so the comp plan would set the stage for that sort of action.
yeah.
The other community I was thinking of when you were talking about the corridors and landscape is Sarasota County committed to a really significant tree planting program along their major arterials. And so that goes back around 20 years. So now in some corridors, they have nice wide medians and maturing oak trees that are throwing out some shade, and it's really attractive. And
It is attractive, and it also increases the value of the property, which increases the taxable value, and which is flows into the county itself. So, it's an investment that I think can provide a great return for a lot of reasons, for not only for the county but for the public, and so I just think that's something that we really need to make part of our focus.
I agree, Chuck. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's probably, from a planning standpoint too, we'll be moving into this in next year's work more directly, but some of those arterial corridors, 19 has been developed for 50 years. 56 has been developed for the last 15 to 20 years. And then you've got 54 and 52 and questions about how they're going to develop out in the future. So there's a strategy for those older corridors where it'd be more focused on beautification and managing smaller scale infill and other projects. And then for the corridors that are developing now, try to get the right tools in place. So you're not necessarily reducing what someone can do with their property, you're just reconfiguring it in a way that could be more attractive.
Right, yeah. I mean,
So those are I'm getting ahead of ourselves, ahead of the presentation definitely, but those are the sorts of things we're starting to outline for next year's work.
I think Tammy had presented the idea of redevelopment along that 19 corridor. From Hudson to Holiday, those homes were built in the probably 60s, maybe into the 70s. And redevelopment in those areas has merit. and you talked about the population coming, that definitely could fill the gap for a significant number of people who want to come to Pasco County, in my mind. In other words, you redevelop it, then you can sell it.
Yeah, and I think regionally relatively affordable places to live too, so it wouldn't be necessarily priced down to the market.
No, and you have all the infrastructure already there, so you don't have to create new infrastructure, maybe enhance it, but not redevelop it or develop it as you do on the east side of the county, so.
And back to your tree planting, I mean, we were, when they widened 52 near the interstate, we were all sad to see, there was this whole line of 100-plus-year-old oaks that were taken out when they did that. And I mean, I get that they needed to widen it, but it would have been nice if they had gone in and planted oak trees so that 100 years from now, you got a whole nother row, but that wasn't done.
Right, right.
And so it's just sad would have been nice to have had something in place whereby those would have been replaced for a future generation.
Yeah, it's one of the things, like, in dealing with the DOT, if the county comp plan calls for that, then there's leverage for the county to seek that to be built into a project. If the county comp plan is silent on it, then there's not a lot of leverage.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time? We were going to try to.
Yeah, I think we should jump.
Okay. And then I didn't read the last bullet, but the last bullet is really sort of trying to talk about redevelopment of older communities and improving older communities, which is, when we look at the county through the market area lens, that's really the west market area. But there's pockets elsewhere that are now, 30 to 40 years old, commercial development along stretches of 41 and other places that are approaching that time where we're going to start to see reinvestment, and there may be a chance to shape that a little bit.
Well, in 301 and
Yeah.
Richey, Dade City, Zephyr Hills, yeah.
Yep. The next one is the pretty straightforward concern is, one of the direct impacts of development is traffic, and most of the county is developed in an auto-oriented fashion, so to get a gallon of milk or to get your kid to school or to get to work, you're driving. So you're in a car and you experience the county from a car to meet most of your daily, weekly needs. So we need to look really carefully at how how we accommodate those additional trips on the network with already constrained capacity. It's a fundamental problem. A lot of that gets addressed in the long-range transportation plan by the Pasco MPO, but the comp plan also provides some guidance about what should be focused on. So these bullets, in green is really dealing with this question about projected demand and limited capacity on the current network, and then creating more safe, walkable, and connected places. People did talk about wanting to get to places where they could walk from destination to destination, where kids in a subdivision could visit their friends in another subdivision without going out onto a major arterial or crossing a major arterial. So some of it is that, there's the arterial grid network that serves the longer haul trips, but a lot of the subdivision streets are isolated, so there's not a lot of interconnectivity. So it's hard to stay on the local roadway network and get from place to place. You've got to go out onto the arterial and then back into either a commercial destination or your kid's family's subdivision and circulate back on that street network. So the lack of secondary street grid is one of the things that's really pushing congestion onto the arterials. And I think we need to look really carefully at where you have the identification of corridors for conservation and preservation, and think about building on that program. I mean, that corridor preservation and the Vision Road development process in the county is really critically important to help take some of the pressure off the major arterials. And then longer term, thinking about how transit and walking and biking can become, even for a small percentage of trips. We're not saying 30% of the people in the county are going to bike to work, but if 5% do or 2%, that makes a difference. We start to take a little bit of pressure off the roadway network. So we'll be looking at the possibility for better integrating planning for transportation and transit, or land use and transit, So it can be possible to take a bus someplace. Right now, it's a real challenge. And the folks that are dependent on transit to get around are really limited in what their job opportunities are, what their educational opportunities are, and their access to services and resources. So we did get that discussion specifically, but I would say 80% of the discussion we had was about roadway congestion and roadway safety. You know, people are concerned about how we serve this projected development with the existing roadway network. And you're kind of, to a certain extent, you're getting to the point where you're maxed out in travel lanes in the built-up parts of the county. So thinking about how you manage those volumes on that limited capacity is really critical.
One question, maybe you think it's far out at this stage, but in 2050 it might not be, is that what you just said is that we're maxed out as far as widening roads, some of these major roads.
Yeah.
Because to widen the road, it's going to cost a lot of money to acquire the right-of-way just to do that, and before you even start paving the road. And we're always talking about trying to cut down on emissions and things like that. We have this median in the middle of the road. Why can't we at some stage start thinking about, you know, like overhead transportation, like a monorail or something like that on the median, and you can drop people off in various shopping areas and places like that, because that's where masses of people go. The individual businesses you can still drive to. You don't have to take mass transportation, but it's a method of getting around that's, I think, pretty darn efficient. They do a lot of that kind of stuff in Europe, and I'm not saying Europe's a good example of what we can do, but I mean, it is a way to get around, and the space is already there.
So,
can
I just want to just address that comment directly. So MPO has been looking at this, particularly on the 54 corridor, because that's the best example of a roadway that it's mostly 6 lanes.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really expand it much more than that.
Right.
So as part of the first place this is being discussed is at the 54-41 interchange, because they're talking about doing maybe a flyover there or some other form of improvement. But and there was a task force created, and they looked at many options, but many of the preferred options had transit accommodated either in the flyover or, you know, in some way put into that improvement.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, there's some issues with it, which is one, there's the cost, like how are you going to pay for it? But also there's the whole, you mentioned the beautification issue, because if you're using your median for transit, that means you're not putting trees in. I mean, we had this very conversation. We had a group come in that wanted to put beautiful landscaping in the median of 54, but then we had to remind them that's our possible location for transit. So you can't have both. At some point you got to.
Unless
pick.
it's above.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now at one point we talked about doing an elevated facility, and the public didn't want to see that either. So we, you know.
Yeah, I'm not talking about an elevated road, and I think that's problematic. I mean, one of the problems that they have on Highway 19, it's great driving down 19 if you're going to the Skyway, but for businesses, every time it gets elevated, those businesses are wiped out. You know, so that's really counterproductive in my opinion. But if you had a single rail above the trees that doesn't take up the space, but
Yeah, but
can carry a
I
lot
will
of
tell
people.
you that light rail, maybe BRT could work, but the light rail is only going to work if it connects to other light rail. I mean, if you just have light rail on 54 corridor, it doesn't connect to anything. It's not going to be, you won't get enough ridership for it to support it. You would need light rail throughout the Tampa Bay region for it to be effective. And so the only meaningful transit in terms of the Tampa Bay region that's being developed right now is BRT along the interstate corridor. And so we've had conversations about how do we connect our local system, like the 54 corridor and other routes, other major arterials, to that BRT system on the interstate. And there could be a 54 route that does that, but I'm just being honest with you, the chances of us being able to get light rail up in the air on 54, I don't know that we'd ever get the ridership unless the whole Tampa Bay region's doing it. And we've seen no momentum whatsoever. The one place we were talking about doing was on the CSX corridor, but then apparently CSX decided they weren't gonna sell the right of way for it. So unless the region decides to do light rail, it's gonna be hard for us locally to do light rail. So the options I've seen on the 54 corridor do have some options that have the BRT in an elevated facility. So, but you have to elevate something. I mean, if you don't elevate something, everybody would get stuck at the intersections. So there's got to be some balance there. If you're going to have urban level development, at some point you're going to have to elevate some facility, some form of transportation facility, whether it's transit or the road or because if you don't elevate, you're stuck at every intersection. And you see how many lights we're putting in on 54. There's a new light added every month.
Yeah. I know.
So putting transit at grade is going to be minimally effective.
So, yeah, I would, all of those things, I would support that. But in a lot of it, transit is effective when it can connect places with higher intensity, either jobs or housing. So if you can start to put those nodes together, then you've got the potential to connect them and people have some options of getting around. But it's really hard without the density first. And a lot of it is the way the money flows to transit projects from the federal government is you have to prove ridership and you have to prove that population employment concentration to access federal money. You know, that can be 50+% of a project's cost, capital costs, but you got to make the case for that. And even, you know, Tampa struggles with that on projects. St. Pete's struggling with that for Sunrunner BRT. You know, they barely made the threshold just to get that BRT line approved. And they're serving downtown St. Pete, you know, and the tourist destinations on the beach. So it's a tough, that's one of those things we'll have to grapple with when we move into the plan, but when we think about 56 and parts of 54, right away it's going to start costing as much as pavement. And so you're going to be you're going to squeeze as much capacity out of that existing right away. It could be grade separating major intersections. So you can take some pressures off the intersections. And then trying to figure out ways to get transit to work and benefit the transit in the corridor. So if a transit is stuck in the same traffic as a car, it's not a very attractive alternative. So you've got to favor the transit trip in some way to make it attractive.
Okay.
But the idea of even without transit, the possibility of creating more walkable destinations in the county is something that came up. So looking at, I know the county has worked on this with some of the transit-oriented development policies previously, looking at development on 54, but trying to take some of those places and making it so it's possible to park once and access and do different things within a development rather than driving from place to place along a strip center or between shopping center and shopping center. Those are the kinds of things that can be incorporated in the land development code eventually to help promote more compact development. And that starts to set the stage for a place that can be a transit node.
So, hey, Steve, when you talk about creating more safe, walkable, and connected places, has there ever been a study done on what would be the limits of distance between to encourage people to walk? In other words, would a distance of 2 miles or 3 miles be the target for a walkable distance, or would it be less? I'm just.
It's a lot. Yeah, I mean it's a great point. Is that all the research shows that people talk about a quarter-mile walk shed as a 5 to 10 minute walk, and that's what people tend to tolerate. So all of the research about who will walk to a transit stop to use transit, it's within a quarter mile and maybe a half mile of that transit stop.
Okay.
So that's your kind of node that where you're trying to concentrate development.
But I would also think that you would try to create walkable distances, but with connected, we have connected places here, but with like supermarkets or a a outlet store or a walkable to in my area, we have the new plaza, or the Sierra built that area.
Outlet.
The outlet mall, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and there are some people that I notice that will walk to certain stores within that community, but they live within that, I would say within that mile at the maximum distance. Where people in my community will go to a grocery store to purchase certain merchandise because they can bring it home in a paper bag or plastic bag.
Right.
So I think that's, something that needs to be looked at as to what the distance would be. And transportation is the tough one. I know, I live out there by that diversion diamond, and I think it works well. A few times I've used it. But there are people that are on social media that have said negative things about it.
Right.
But I see the traffic moving much quicker through that area than it did in the past. So I guess the point is that you're not going to be able to please a lot of people. You're not going to please everybody when it comes to these walkable areas. I would like to see more bus transportation, personally.
I didn't know you were a social media guy.
Well, let me just make one comment on this, because I think to a large extent, the county has been good about it, trying to incentivize and encourage compact, walkable communities. And you'll see some examples throughout the county, Starkey Ranch or Bexley, that some of the newer communities have pretty good compact, walkable. We call them Mudderham or T&D or various forms of development. The issue I see is that we have a lot of them that are planned out very well, but it's all encouraged and incentivized. It's not mandated. And so what happens is you get a great community like a Starkey Ranch or Bexley that has all these compact, walkable, mixed-use requirements or a sense of place, but then one development over is a gated subdivision with no interconnectivity whatsoever, doesn't even interconnect to the one that is connected. And so, and I'll just be honest with you, we're sometimes our own worst enemy. We'll approve MPDs that are just flat out gated subdivisions with no interconnectivity. They require an alternative standard in our code. Staff recommends approval of it. The planning commission approves it. The board approves it, and everybody just acts like it's not a problem. But we're kind of doing this to ourselves because we all say we want the Starkey Ranches of the world,
Which you'll approve.
but we're approving gated subdivisions every other week with no interconnectivity whatsoever. So, my point is if we're serious that this is what we want, is compact, walkable communities with a street network that's connected and plenty of alternate modes, at some point we need to just step up and say, this is what you have to do. Because otherwise, what's the point of having a beautiful project like a Starkey Ranch and then everything around it is just gated subdivision?
Yeah.
I'm not sure you're achieving your goal.
Right. We heard probably a few different people share the experience of their growing up in different neighborhoods in the county as kids, their ability to weave their way around the local street network and avoid the big arterials and avoid crossing and avoid big parking lots. And that's a real, almost impossible to do now.
Because I review almost every MPD that comes through the county, I'd say probably 80 to 90% of them have some part of their project they don't want to interconnect. And with all due respect to staff says, okay, you don't have to. And then planning commission approves it too, and the board approves it too. I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just saying that
Right.
we have a code section that says you shall interconnect. But we are frequently granting alternative standards or variances so that people don't have to do that. And in many cases, just because the developer says, I don't want to,
Right.
or I want to have a gated subdivision. I don't want to have an interconnectivity.
We have somewhat that same problem with some of the commercial properties too,
Yes.
because you have to go back out on the road to get to the very
I mean,
next
commercial,
property.
I will say that staff is a little, in my opinion, I'll defend staff a little on commercial. They're less likely to grant an alternative standard when it's two commercial projects interconnecting because, and also the commercial is less likely to resist it because commercial actually wants customers to be able to go back and forth
But
between.
I see a lot of properties, though, that where they have an adjoining parking lot, and then they blocked anybody from getting through.
I agree, but that tends to be the older ones. I think it would be rare that you would see a new project, Brad, tell me if I'm wrong. I think it'd be rare if you saw a new commercial project where staff was not requiring an interconnect or agreeing that they didn't have to interconnect, unless there was some major wetland system in the way or something that prevented it from happening. What I'm saying is I think we're probably doing a little better on commercial that as far as requiring interconnectivity. But I can tell you on residential, we are frequently granting alternative standards or variances so they don't have to interconnect.
And that's because they want a gated community.
Because they want a gated communities, these are the
Yeah, I
reasons.
think you see that where an owner wants to control their turf. They don't want to punch their road out to the guy next door because they're selling a different property, different.
And sometimes
to a
they're doing it
different
because
market.
the adjacent residents say they don't want an interconnect, or the adjacent property owner says, and so staff says, if the adjacent landowners don't want it, we'll just say, well, okay, you don't have to. I'm just saying, it's sort of a death by 1,000 cuts, is we're experiencing now, is because nobody realizes we're doing it, but I'm just telling you, we are.
Yeah, it's true, yeah.
I think it's an incredibly common challenge for high growth communities to have to hold the line on that. Both the right of way reservation for more like collector arterial roadways, new arterial roadways through undeveloped areas, and then the interconnection of the local street network.
Yeah, I will say that on the Vision roadway network, in my opinion, staff is fairly good about making sure those right-of-ways are reserved, making sure that the connections for the collector Vision roadways is there. But in terms of local connections, local road interconnects, in my opinion, we're doing a horrible job with it.
So what would be the answer? I could see. Yeah,
I'm just telling you, our code already requires it. Our land development code explicitly requires interconnectivity of local roads. But we are frequently granting alternative standards or variances to not do it.
Are there communities out there, and this is kind of just you speak about gated communities and just strictly talking about residential here, but, are there places around that if you want to put a gate, you pay some type of surcharge?
I don't know if I've heard that specifically. I
mean,
know that it's very common.
It's almost like
yeah, historically, it's sort of done the reverse, which is,
Yeah,
like if you're a Mudderm or T&D,
Right.
where you have interconnectivity, you
Yeah,
pay a lower
sure.
mobility fee, and we actually create an incentive to have interconnectivity.
Yeah.
We have not done the reverse, though, and say, if you're not gonna have interconnectivity, you need to pay a higher
yeah,
mobility
right,
fee.
sure, right.
It's something we can probably look at. Because you're right, though, Jamie, if you have a gated subdivision with no interconnectivity, you're putting more pressure on the arterial
Exactly.
network than
Mhm.
a Starkey Ranch is,
Mhm.
okay? So maybe you should be paying a higher fee.
Mhm.
But it's not just a fee issue, it's also are we gonna enforce our code or not?
Yeah, practically,
I mean,
right. I guess just one more thing to add on this, 'cause I know we'll probably want to move on, but
Sure.
just the terminology, and this might be a kind of more of a pet peeve of mine. When I hear the words and the terminology walkable, and I think of, the climate we live in, and, some communities are a lot more walkable in February than they are for the average resident in August here. I definitely see the merit, and I think there's a lot of value to the connectivity. But if somebody interprets, is that a walkable community? Well, yeah, we have a sidewalk. Versus is it connected, where I think of now when I drive around some of these places that are more connected, where I see golf carts and scooters and, those kind of means
That's true,
of
yeah.
getting around, I think is an important aspect. Now, it gets a little different if you talk about proximity of shopping centers to one another, and can they walk from one to the other? I get it, but when you talk about connectivity to subdivisions and quote-unquote walkability, I see a lot less people walking at 5 o'clock this afternoon than I would in a February afternoon when it's 70 degrees outside, so.
Well, let me add to that, because in some of the newer places we planned out, like Connected City and BOPH, the multi-use paths have to not only serve bicycle and pedestrian, but also golf carts.
Correct.
So I agree with you that bicycle and golf cart is probably more realistic for Florida in terms of interconnectivity than walking. But we're not uniform there. I mean, so if you're in Connected City and VOPH, yes, we're planning for this wonderful community that's going to be interconnected with golf carts. What are we doing in the rest of the county?
Yeah, correct.
We're not. So that's the issue, is we have these pockets where we plan so well, but then we have other places where we do virtually none of the great things that we're talking about in these other places. So we're just going to keep creating the haves and the have-nots in Pasco. You live in VOPH in Connected City, you can get around great. If you live somewhere else, you have to get in your car to go anywhere. So
The inside the gate, outside the gate,
So you're
sort
gonna
of
have to
commentary
start
came up
kicking us that we
multiple
don't
times.
Vote to approve this.
Let me switch forward to
I'm just
another
saying you
one.
need to start taking a harder look when somebody says they don't want to connect to something, or they, maybe we need to start thinking about that.
Yeah, but when people submit MPDs, they're required to include a mobility plan with their.
They do, but
with
I'm
their
telling you, I
plan.
see so many MPDs where they say, I don't want to interconnect to anything around me. Even though the code says that, and they seek a variation to not do it, and I'm not blaming anybody in particular. We're all rubber stamping this.
Okay, good points.
So we pulled some of the economic development related comments together under this category. Some of the nuance here is that, people want increased job opportunities, but they mean specifically closer to home. So there's job opportunities in the region, but they'd like to access those opportunities closer to home. So we know that's been, significant focus of the county's economic development efforts.
Can I stop you 1 second?
Yeah.
Is there a way to get these screens back on so we can actually see what's?
Oh, are you down on your screen?
Yeah, we're down on our side.
They're all,
Keep
they're
going
all
off.
Yeah, they all went down. Otherwise, we can turn the TV screens, but
Can we swing them back around to you?
it's helpful to see what you're reading.
Well, they do something.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right, no.
We had issues earlier today, and we rebooted it, and it was working before the start of the meeting. Did it go offline again?
Make a comment, if I may.
Yeah.
Don Anderson, my apologies for being late. I confused the time, but when I walked in, you were talking about the character and identity aspect. And just something that really struck me in that was you mentioned knowledge around the comp plan. Good illustration is my wife. We voted on some things here that
Good
she
now.
is adamantly opposed to for a number of reasons and ridicules me for the vote, but yet it's obvious to me, and this is community-wide in most instances, the average citizen just doesn't have a clue as to how decisions are made at this level. And I think it's an extraordinary shortcoming that can I won't say easily overcome, but it certainly can be with more informational sessions and I would say abbreviated, but yet factual related to the processes that has to occur. And it just struck me. Thought I'd take a minute to say that.
Yeah, we think, the one observation, it seems like the market area framework for thinking about the future of the county is something that's really stuck with people, but it's still at a pretty broad scale. So it's hard for people to visualize that. Like, what does that market area line across the, South Market area really mean? And we think sort of breaking that down a little bit further is probably something we'll start to get into in the comp plan work. So when people see a map, they can say, oh, I live here, here's what the map says about my future, and either I like that or I don't, but then they would have a basis for having a discussion about it, so.
And then the process, of course, by which anyone wishing to make a change has to go through.
Yeah, whether it's a comp plan level discussion or a land development discussion, yeah. So this was sort of two ideas in this set of comments, and you'll see this when we get the report out, and you can dig through it in more detail, is the idea about economic development and reserving those sites where you can get high-quality jobs, close to where folks live, well-connected to surrounding communities, and then thought about thinking more about the fiscal impact of projects and the fiscal challenges that certain kinds of development presents. So, one of the things that's happening, obviously, in the county is you've got a lot of development that happened in the 60s and 70s. So there's a significant increase in cost for improving sewer and water infrastructure, dealing with drainage problems, repaving roads, which is going to take resources away from doing some of the big things you might want to do elsewhere, like preserving significant tracts of land for conservation or improving parks and recreation facilities or community facilities like libraries. So those are, a lot of people raise those concerns about, how do we pay for the things that we want in our communities? How do we pay for these additional services like, enhanced landscaping along corridors or other things? So there's that, it's a fundamental tension, like we don't want to pay more taxes, but we want more stuff out of the county. So, it's the pressure on the Board of County Commissioners about understanding the long-term implications of the kinds of development they approve, and how that affects the tax base over the long haul. So,
Can I ask you a question about
Yeah.
that? Because this has been a recurring issue with our staff, because we have an existing policy in our comp plan that talks about encouraging land uses that generate more in taxes than they consume in services. It basically requires a fiscal impact type analysis. And the few times where this has become an issue, and it tends to be an issue when somebody's trying to convert a non-residential use to a residential use. So, but what we discovered is that there's no good tool for our staff to easily use to determine the fiscal impacts of a proposed land use change. Our Office of Economic Growth had to go pay REMI some exorbitant amount of money to do this analysis, and they did it for one or two projects, but at one point there was something called FIAM that Fishkind had done, but apparently it's not supported anymore. So this is a wonderful concept that we should be encouraging more land uses that generate a positive tax impact. I fully agree with it. But I will tell you that it's very difficult for our staff to make sure that's happening if there's no tool out there that they can just plug in the land uses and determine whether it has a positive fiscal impact or not. So I don't want us to put something in the comp plan that staff is incapable of implementing in practice. Love the concept, but you all need to help us figure out a way that staff can actually implement it on the ground. Or otherwise, we have all of these policies in our comp plan that say we want to do this, and they're almost meaningless. Because we already have a comp plan policy that says we'll do this, and it's very hard for our staff to implement.
Understood. Yeah. I mean, this is our attempt to report what folks were saying they wanted to see.
And I think a lot of people
So
say
far.
they want this. They want to see us improve our tax base, have more non-residential development, because we almost make a profit on non-residential development in terms of taxes.
Right.
That we can then use to create more services. But I could tell you, every day of the week we get a request to convert a non-residential use to a residential use, and I'm always saying, what about the fiscal impacts? And staff they're incapable of figuring out whether it has a positive or negative fiscal impact. I'm not blaming staff, I'm gonna be clear, we have some smart people on our staff, but they legitimately do not have the tools to do it.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, the state that the old Fishkind model, I believe, was supported by the state for a period of time, and then they pulled support, so it wasn't maintained. And that was intended for comp plan policy development.
Right, it was great when it existed, but it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So if there's some other easy way of developing, like, if there's some threshold at which, for certain land uses that we know have a positive fiscal impact, or in other words, if there's a way to boil down what Fishkind had done into more easier to implement rules that says, this amount of non-residential is enough to create a positive fiscal impact, or this amount of residential is going to create a negative fiscal impact, or this type of residential is a negative, is multifamily positive and single family is not. I mean, those are the kinds of things that if we can't do it through a model, like Fishkind's model, maybe there's a way to create simpler rules that our staff can use to say, these land uses are positive, these land uses are negative.
Yeah, we've talked about that as a possible research task for next year, is to look into either through specific county or case study research about just the cost of, or the cost and fiscal impacts of different development patterns and types, which could, it wouldn't be a model, so it wouldn't be plugging in an individual project. But we could look at what models are out there. I mean, there are some off-the-shelf models, and there are some communities that have developed their own spreadsheet-based tools that aren't, a black box or a proprietary system.
I just don't want us to be in a position where we have to go out and hire a consultant every time we
Every
want to
time
do a
you do
fiscal
it.
impact analysis. We would go bankrupt doing it.
Sure.
'Cause we make land use decisions every single day.
Yep. $14 minutes total.
Race is on.
I'm trying, okay. This one, we lumped topics. If you look at the second bullet with the green text, people raise this whole set of concerns about housing affordability, food insecurity, transit accessibility, and unequal access to opportunity. Basically, this county works way better for some people than it does for other people. How do we achieve a better balance of how people experience life in the county?
If I may, I know I missed this slide, but back to slide number 7, as it relates to housing affordability. You have year 1 and 2 diagnostics. What kind of data have you collected at this point relative to housing affordability?
We held on that until the housing affordability research that was done for the moratorium was complete.
Okay.
So we're looking at we're sort of digging through that data to see to what extent we can use that, or we need to look at other sources.
Okay.
So that could be something we look into more deeply next year.
Okay.
I mean, what we're finding that our subconsultant, SB Friedman Development Advisors, has been doing affordable housing research in the region. So they've done a lot of work for Pinellas County.
Right.
Pinellas has a certain percent of their penny for money that's used to support affordable housing projects. And they've been providing, we did some additional work to look at setting up a system to get proposals to figure out how to spend that money. And then they're doing evaluations of projects to see if it's a good use of the funds. And we're doing some similar work in Hillsborough County. But they're supporting that work here, so they understand the regional affordability challenges. And honestly, what we're finding is it's really about how much public money goes into subsidizing units specifically. It's really hard to do it through zoning and through other mechanisms because they're just not targeted enough. Like inclusionary zoning and affordable housing bonuses aren't producing a lot of units. It's the projects that are getting some sort of direct funding. So
More likely in a place like St. Pete, where those things.
St. Pete has worked with developers to apply for some of that penny for money specifically, and they have their own funding. So they're patching together a series of public sources
Do you
to
know
write
if one
down
of your
projects.
data points on affordability, livability will include the United Way Alice report, asset limited, income constrained, but employed?
We had the sources, the Alice report is one, what is this? The Schimberg Center at University of Florida does housing research county by county, so they have good data on the county. And then they look at, what we did for Pinellas was look at, for for sale housing, looked at MLS data about what's on the market. and compared that to income by class of income. And then we looked at, we used a couple private sources like CoStar for apartment rents to try to get a handle on what the rental differentials were and how that served demand.
That's encouraging. Thank you.
But it really, the key, at the end of all that, there's no question there's significant need for more affordable housing across the board. People are paying, 45, 50% of their income on their housing, and the guidelines are 30. And all communities in the region are struggling with the same question. It's really targeting the tools to start to try to solve that problem. What was the other? I'm trying to think of specific anecdotes about these items.
There was regarding the opportunity, there was some discussion about the great employment center opportunities the county's developing, and how people who are maybe working a convenience store job on the west side of the county could actually access those employment hubs. So there was discussion about opportunity through transportation, transit hubs.
If I may mention one other thing that I think, I don't know if it's something that you can create some kind of a baseline, but with the added 223,000 folks joining us, there's already occurring displacement that I'm seeing tenants experience. They're being displaced because of people that are moving into the area. It really started at the, better home value for people coming in, but it's also down to the tenant level now, rental properties where people are,
as prices are going up,
have lived here, raised here, are actually being displaced because of the increase in rents and people coming into the area for that demand.
Yeah, I think the amount of market money that's coming in is definitely, people are bringing fat checkbooks into the region and pricing folks out. And then just the movement from folks that are getting priced down of Hillsborough and Pinellas coming up to Pasco to try to find cheap housing is putting pressure on the market too. So some of it has to do with just raw supply, like the market needs to probably be producing twice as number of houses per week or month, or units per week or month to meet that demand, and that ramp up hasn't happened yet.
And a broader spectrum of housing as well.
So we mentioned that a little bit.
Subsidized workforce housing.
Yeah.
Is completely
I was
ignored.
going to add, that was one thing that came up too, just diversity in the types of housing. Not everyone can be a homeowner and have these, big lots,
Right.
and not everyone can afford these new high rents and these new developments. So even some of the fourplexes and, just different diversity and options also came up.
Full spectrum.
So I know you said that inclusionary zoning's been not very successful. What about linkage fees, where the developers pay an extra fee that we could then use for creating more affordable housing? Has that been successful in other communities?
One of the issues is under Florida state law, you can really only do it through a bonus. You can't do it as a raw requirement. So you can't just say everybody has to pay into a linkage fee. You have to say, if you want 20% more units, there could be a fee you pay to get access to those additional units on your property that could go into a fund. So we have to look at how the math works, because under the state law says you have to make the developer whole for that contribution in some way. So you have to give them enough units that they kick off additional income to pay either into a fund or to provide that unit on site.
You can't penalize them. You have to make them whole for the
You have to make them whole through the bonus. Yeah, so, it's tricky from a legal standpoint because it's a moving target. That value of that unit changes over time, and the cost to construct it changes over time. So getting the math right is pretty tricky.
And ultimately, the funding for such a...
Are you aware of anybody that's done it under the new state law successfully?
There has been very few units constructed under the new law with the bonus system. I'd have to look at the research. I don't know it off the top of my head.
I think they've been successful in St. Pete with some of that. where they've actually taken revenue?
Through a bonus program.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we could look in, could be
They
part
called
of
it a
it.
bonus program, but they made the developer whole.
Okay.
The difference between the market rate.
You could do it through a fee reduction and other methods to bring the cost down of delivering the affordable unit.
Right.
Well, I mean, for example, like our mobility fee, we subsidize it to zero. So if it's an affordable unit, they pay zero mobility fee. So I guess you could say that's part in offsetting the cost, right?
It would be part of an offset, yeah. You could count that as part of an offset. The fees can be counted for that. So we'd have to look, I think for us, from a research standpoint, we could either look at the broad question about affordability, but there are sources that tell us what the different affordability challenges are by income level. Or we could spend more time looking at the specific tool to try to calibrate the tool to work here. So that's what I'm sort of leaning toward the second, focusing on the tool and the mechanism rather than, we know affordability is a challenge. We could put a really fine point on that, finding, but we know it's a challenge. So basically,
I'd rather us focus on the tool.
what we
to
do
be
about it, I
honest,
think, is
because
more useful.
Unless, I think our community development department knows there's an issue. It's just a matter of how do we address it?
Yeah,
How do we create funding
Right.
to address the issue?
yeah, I agree.
What's the criteria for affordable housing? What makes it affordable?
Well, statistically, it's generally, as you said, 30%. And then HUD in each jurisdiction comes up with the profile.
For the income qualification, so if you're 60% of median income, you could qualify for a subsidized unit in the low-income housing tax credit program. So it's a federal tax credit program that a developer would participate in by setting aside a certain number of units at a certain income level could afford. And then, so those people would have to be qualified to access that unit at a certain price.
To make it clearer, what price unit would meet that criteria in today's market,
In Pasco County?
Pasco County?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I'd have to do math faster than I typically can.
They've actually, the fair market values out of HUD are right now sort of limbo. You can actually make application as a geography for exception to what was published previously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's nothing, I think it's easy to say that there's nothing on the private market now available to people making 60% of median income. They couldn't afford it for rent, and they couldn't afford to buy it. So it requires some sort of intervention to hit that target.
How do they afford to build it then?
That's
Tax credits.
that'd be the purpose of a tax credit or a grant program or
Florida
a
Housing Finance Corporation will have RFPs that are available
yeah.
with certain criteria they're looking to meet, and then you compete for it, but it's highly competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with that is that it's very difficult to, one of the things that makes it difficult is that all these various companies are competing for the money to build these affordable housing projects. But the problem is that it could take, most of a year to figure out if you're even going to get the money, because there's no guarantee, even if your project would normally qualify. And so
You're still competing against other affordable housing
and the
builders
problem
to get
is
access to the
that
money.
you're asking the property owner to essentially take their property off the market under contract.
To wait and see if they can put the deal
hope
together.
that somebody's going to approve that project.
Right.
And that's a problem. That is a real problem, especially in a rising market, because people are thinking, I don't know if I want to take my property off the market for 8, 9, 10 months while I wait to see if you might get funded. It's almost like a drawing, a raffle almost.
And the total timeline, even if you've lined up property today and you go through this process, it's 5 years, literally, until you can unlock the door and let people in. I mean, that's not
But what I'm saying is the problem is to actually acquire a property under that system, because in order to acquire it, you have to tie it up. And if it was my property, I'd be in this, especially in this kind of a market.
But I think what they're saying, though, is that if there was a local funding source that can be used to provide the same subsidy, and you're not dependent on this state raffle,
Right.
That's different.
then there may be a way to get the project done.
If you know
even
within
even if you don't
90
win the
days.
state raffle.
Yeah.
If it's a 90-day window, that's a lot different than a 12-month window.
But I think that the value of some of our research could be on that end of the spectrum about how do you deliver, what tools do you need to deliver those affordable projects? Because there's no question about the need, and it's only, that need is a greater challenge day by day. Housing costs are outpacing increases in salary across the board. So, there's no question about the need.
We talk a lot, the commissioners talk a lot about live work, and at the upper echelon, it might be practical in some of the new developments, but for the folks that are servicing at the service level, live and work is going out the window here in Pasco. If you're making minimum income, it would take you almost 3 jobs in order to meet the 30% standard on your housing expenses.
So even if you put an apartment complex next to the mall, they can't afford to live in the apartment complex next to the mall. You're basically saying.
Well, if it has all the amenities that they offer today.
If it's
yeah,
if it's
could
new
not.
construction, it's going to be pretty
Would
pricey.
not, you're right.
But I think the challenge really is that it has to be, we have to expand the range of possibilities to create more affordability. So a multifamily project next to the mall could be good over time to allow people to walk to work and meet some of their daily needs without requiring a car trip. But then there's how do we meet workforce housing? How do we meet lower income housing needs? And there's folks that are, still have a homeless population in Pasco County, although it's not super evident. But, the whole spectrum of need is significant. So try to align strategies to meet different levels of need would be what we try to look at.
I have one concern there. You said serviceability, and our nationwide, we have moved from a manufacturing economy to a serviceability one. I would like to see at some point in time, because we talked about affordability, at some point in time, jobs within the county.
Better jobs in the
Better
county.
jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that's manufacturing, not service. There are some service industries that, like your medical facilities, that's a service. They are definitely high-paying positions. But when you go to your retail service industry, as you said, that's minimum wage. Of course, minimum wage fluctuates and has gone up considerably in this last year. So I'd like to see more job development in the manufacturing industry throughout the county.
Yeah, I think that's part of what's on the table for economic development.
I hope so. I haven't seen much. Every time we have.
It's hard, it's tough.
Okay.
Let me just tell you that we fight this battle every single day, and about staff making sure that there's adequate set aside for office industrial development, and it's a constant battle because the developers all want to do residential.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I concur with that 100%. And but I still see manufacturing as a key component to.
One of the real fundamental problems I think we have is that if you talk to anybody in business today, there's nobody who wants to work. They want the apartment, but they don't want to work. And I don't care how affordable it is. If you don't have an income,
That's right.
somebody's got to pay.
Yeah.
And and I've been involved in some of those where I've tried to help somebody out and put somebody into a property maybe that I own, and they get a job and they're there for 3 days and then they just don't show up again. And then
I don't think we can tackle that one with the
I
comp
can't
plan.
tell you.
Yeah, I don't think that's not a comp plan issue, Chuck.
Yeah, but I'm talking. It's an affordable housing issue.
Yeah, it is.
And that's why we have these affordable housing needs, because people don't want to work. I can't believe it. It's just, and it is, it's throughout the community. Everybody you talk, I don't think I have to tell anybody here. Just about everybody you talk to that runs a business or even doctor's office or anything like that. It's all,
Get a good
I
worker.
can't hire anybody. Nobody wants to work. You know, I'm paying them $20 an hour. They still don't show up. You know, I mean, that's a problem. And one of the problems is that they get out of high school and they don't know how to do anything. You know?
Yeah, we have.
We need some more trade schools. We need teach people how to do something. Fix an air conditioner, weld two pieces of metal together, fix a car. I mean, practical things that people need. They don't necessarily need people that have a degree in
I will tell you that
animal husbandry or something.
Between some of the programs the school district has and that we have, there's a movement to create trade academies. So that issue is being addressed.
Yes, I know that, and
Chris
that's
can
good.
tell you all the new schools they're building that are focused on trade.
But there is a lot of areas that aren't doing that, and I think we're smart to do that here, because you know, that creates pride of ownership. I mean, it just creates so many positive things when you have.
And some of our penny for Pasco money this next round is going to be allocated for those type of trade programs. So that I think we're doing. I don't know that we're going to solve the problem of people not wanting to work at all.
But there are great opportunities.
Well, I don't know how we got here, but
Valerie
it used
just
to be
warned me
that
that we're over time, so we're eating into.
Just having a good time.
The time you spent elsewhere. Well, I really appreciate the feedback. The last slide was a quick note about the comments about people not understanding what the future of the county holds. So when we say 223,000 people, it flips them out because they don't know what that. So part of our job is to explain what the implications of that could be. And that's some of the research we're doing now. So I wanted to mention a couple of the things that we're doing now is we're looking at both demand, like the nature of demand for different real estate products around the county. And then we're also looking at the capacity to support demand under the current future land use categories. So what is the headroom under your current plan to support new development? So we're trying to get a handle on that number. It's going to be a range. It's not going to be a precise number because sites develop in different ways for different reasons. But we're going to try to get a handle on that. So we'll say you need more or less of a certain kind of category, or you have enough now. You need to focus on land development, not comp plan amendments, or land development changes, not comp plan amendments. So we're trying to get a rough match between what that demand picture looks like and what you've got available under the current plan to support development. We should be able to report back on that research in the next couple months. So by August, September, we should have that wrapped up, and then we would move into, when the fiscal year turns September 30th, we'd move into the next year of services. So that would be new research and then starting to put together the broad framework for the plan itself.
Okay.
I'd just like to add one comment. Going through your presentation, I did not hear anything about law enforcement. And you had on one of your charts there, livability in communities.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you don't have good law enforcement, you do not have good living conditions in some communities. And in some communities, they now hire or contract with the sheriff's department to bring extra law enforcement into a community. So I think a key point to anything that we do in this county or in any county is you've got to have an active law enforcement presence. So you just end up.
Yeah, I think law enforcement specifically is not a comp plan matter, but the neighborhood stability, neighborhood stabilization, quality of life is, and that's influenced by safety and security in a community.
Absolutely.
It's also raises the question about how this is part of the county's transition to be acting a little bit more like a city in the older parts of the county. Pasco County is a full-service county, so you provide, outside of the cities, incorporated areas, you still provide municipal services and act like a city in many places. But part of that is dealing with the challenges in older communities. And that may require some different thinking, either redevelopment agency, neighborhood stabilization programs, that we haven't jumped into that in any level of detail yet, but I think that's one of the things we'll address in the plan.
So I agree with you and disagree with you about you saying it's not part of the comp plan. I agree with you in terms of the operation of the sheriff's office, that's not a comp plan issue. But the infrastructure needed to support law enforcement is somewhat of a comp plan land development issue. You know, for example, we don't have a law enforcement impact fee. We have one for fire rescue. We have one for all the other public facilities. We talked about doing one for law enforcement and never did. Not sure why. I would also say as part of our land development process, we're pretty good about exacting sites for parks and schools and fire stations. Rarely, if ever, do I see any discussion about, hey, does the sheriff need a substation? Or there seems like there's a lack of planning for the infrastructure needed to support the sheriff's office.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That was, yeah, understood.
Yes, I think that was a good point. Are there any other questions or suggestions? Anything else you want to go
We
over?
just the write-up for this, which supports these slides and the statements on the slides, will get out in the next couple weeks. And as I mentioned, your request, we'll send it to you when it goes to the county commission. And then we'll probably, the goal would be to have you all review it, see if you're comfortable with it, and then we'd release it into the public, and then we'll move into the next phase of work. But what you'll see again is an attempt to do a straight report of what we heard, not our interpretation or spin or, you know, a selective evaluation. It's things we heard that are relevant to the comp plan update. We're reporting those out as clearly as we can. So this is just a statement of what folks are saying about.
So at what
County.
stage do you then put your spin on it? I mean, for example, you can't say we're going to accommodate 300,000 new people and then we have to keep the whole county rural. Those two statements are mutually inconsistent with each other.
100%.
So at some point, you are going to have to say, the public's saying this, but this is impossible. So we recommend you do X. You know?
Well, that's part of what we're testing now is the capacity under the current categories to see. There's a lot of stuff that looks rural that's not rural in terms of the comp plan or a zoning category. So we have to help people understand that although you see it as rural, it doesn't have a rural comp plan category, and it's going to get, it has the potential for development. So, you know, helping people understand that question is part of it. Like what is the current comp plan likely to produce and where?
We at it from the perspective of all the available acreage and then in these categories.
That's the step we're going through
Where
now.
are you
Yeah, so
relative to capacity?
we should be able to say, if you don't have enough land to support the residential units under your current suburban categories, you're going to have to remap some of your agricultural categories, and we're going to have that debate with folks. So we have to present that and be prepared to talk about it. But I don't know I don't know the answer to that right now. That's what we're moving toward. But yeah, I mean, clearly that's one of the significant tensions in the whole plan is where the
I'm fine with
suburban
you
limit
just
is.
reporting what you heard, but at some point, you as the consultant have to make a recommendation to staff and our board about what we should do from a land use perspective, not just what the citizens said they want.
100%, yeah, this is still kind of just a data dump right now. We're doing the research to figure out if we need to challenge those statements and to what extent we need to.
Okay.
May I ask one more question, Chuck?
No. Go ahead.
The figure, the 40%, the 233,000, how was that number arrived at? Is that something that was reported elsewhere and we adopted, or is it something that you've fleshed out?
It's the way there's control numbers by county and region that the state develops for population projections, and then the county takes those. In this case, the county, working with the MPO and DOT, take that projection and allocate it across the county by what's called traffic analysis zone, and that becomes the basis for the long-range transportation plan.
So yours in Bieber numbers.
Projections. So it starts with the Bieber numbers, and then it gets allocated locally in the regional model called the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Model.
Are you using Bieber high, medium, or low?
It's a Bieber medium is what goes into the regional model.
I did.
And this model is used consistently throughout the counties here in Tampa Bay?
Yeah.
Yes, it's throughout the state, basically.
Yeah.
I think almost everybody.
There's sort of that allocation process that happens with the planning staff and the MPO staff to allocate it based on existing future land use category. And then that's recognized as the official projection. So we haven't challenged that. I mean, it tracks with what you've seen in the past. So that,
I was just going to ask, if we go back to the last time the plan was updated, what was how accurate was our,
I haven't gone back and asked that specific question.
it'd be interesting to know how accurate we were in our forecasting of the population.
It appears that you still have significant capacity under the current future land use categories to accommodate that. So that allocation, where that 233 was allocated to traffic analysis zone, basically tracks with what you've got allowed in future land use categories. But that's what we need to report back to you as a more deeper analysis of what the future land use category capacity is.
I promise, just one more quick question or comment. I
You
wrote,
didn't ask, John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, Pete.
Just said it.
I don't listen
It
to them.
can't be about social media.
Actually, I really don't go on social media. Too many negative things about me. Hey, look, you talked about the 233,000 people, and you said 40% growth. And I wanted to know the age of your anticipated growth into the community. I came here because I retired from a job. Well, actually, I retired, period. I didn't retire from the job retired me. But I'm just curious on many people in my community, and most of the people that moved here in the 60s and 50s, the late 50s, they retired to Pasco County. So I was wondering if you have that figured into this 233K, because those that retire don't need as many services other than the hospitals.
Mhm. We don't currently have a breakdown of, like a demographic breakdown of the projection.
I think that would be.
We've got some info on the age distribution of the population now and in the past, but.
When the Schimber Center for Affordable Housing does their update based on the 2020 census, which I have not heard when that's coming, but they do an age breakout.
Okay,
So they project that out. It's a projection, but.
okay.
I did a rough calculation, and that would be 35,000 more students.
How many schools is that?
That's about 35 more schools.
35 more schools.
So that's about one per year.
But when we're projecting the need for infrastructure schools, I think included in your models that some people aren't generating school-age children.
Correct. So what I just took what our existing population is, about how many students we have in the system now, and then use that to calculate. It's just a rough.
How many acres per school?
So it depends on the school. So elementary, we're usually looking at about 18 to 22 acres. Middle school, about 35. High school, 70. Those are traditional schools. Now, I think we're doing a better job here in Pasco of trying to do some different stuff.
To bring your land
Yeah,
requirements
so
down?
for example, in the Angeline development, we're doing a 6 through 12 STEM school that's located on about 18 acres. So, we're trying to do different things, but there'll still be a need for traditional high school, full-blown athletic facilities, all that stuff. So, we have some future sites that, as David said, I think we have a pretty good process of, reserving sites, but we don't have 35 sites.
By the way, Pete, just so you know, I think that retirees do put a bigger burden on fire rescue than you think.
Definitely on fire rescue, absolutely. That's why we need more hospitals, more doctors. Try to get a doctor's appointment.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly.
Okay,
See?
is there anything else? If not, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second it. Thanks for, that's
Yes,
very
thank you.
informative.
Oh, thank you.
Good
Thanks for the
job,
time.
thank you
We
very
appreciate it.
much. Thank you, Tammy. I know you put it all together. So.
Thank you.
Appreciate all of you
Thanks for
coming.
great questions and great.
Yes.
All right.
We're going to talk schools sometime?
Yes.
Okay.